Welcome here to the Pozen Family Center for Human Rights Annual Internship Symposium. Let me tell you a little bit about us. The Pozen Family Center for Human Rights at the University of Chicago recently celebrated 25 years of supporting innovative interdisciplinary teaching and research initiatives that critically explore the theory and practice of global human rights. We recently launched a new college major in human rights. Majors have unprecedented opportunities to critically engage in human rights practice, which is why we're here today. The internship program is a funded opportunity for students to explore human rights in practice. Started in 1998, it's a year-long program that supports students as they search and prepare for a full-time summer internship, then reflect on their experience and the integration into their academic work. Today, summer 2023 interns will present their fieldwork addressing human rights issues. This panel brings together students who did internships in the broad arena in healthcare and nonprofit organizations and international agencies. I'm Professor Lindsay Gifford. I'm an anthropologist, a Middle Eastern studies specialist, and refugee rights expert. So I'm happy to be here to help guide this symposium. So we're going to invite each of our speakers up today. Today we have Carolina Olivas, Hanna Ho, Michael Guilmette, Christina Byun, Tanaya Vora, and Jordan Flaherty. So I'll be happy to invite Carolina Olivas up first.
Okay, so my organization was Otro Lado, which is a holistic and legal humanitarian, an organization that provides holistic and legal humanitarian support to refugees, deportees, and other migrants in the U.S. and Tijuana through a multidisciplinary client-centered harm reduction-based practice. This is the mission statement of the organization. Last summer, I worked remotely, so I wasn't really able to provide pictures, but these are pictures from a lot of the meets that were held while I worked there. We were regularly updated on the organization's events that were hosted. So I wanted to address what Otro Lado does. It's a binational advocacy program that helps migrants and refugees on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. A big part is providing free legal assistance to deported individuals, but also refugees in the area that are looking for resources on how to apply for the immigration process. The organization has an extensive volunteer program, and most of the people there are volunteers. So we're able to help numerous clients at a time, but we also emphasize the importance of work through advocacy, and we spread information to the migrants on the ground. And the ongoing projects of Otro Lado are helping individuals who have been wrongfully treated within ICE prisons, family reunification cases, and deportee advocacy. There's 5 major programs at the organization. There's a binational deportee program, which is the one that I worked for. It focused on giving legal assistance to individuals and helping them file their FOIAs in hopes of finding them relief programs for people who have been deported. There's also the Border Rights Project, which is more largely just informing the refugees and the migrants of the rights they have at any point in their immigration process. There's also a family reunification program, which I got to chip in at times, and it was really fun because we got to understand the importance of unifying the families who have been separated while they were at the border. And the 4th program, which is the litigation program, was something that I didn't really get a lot of work in, but it was lawyers and legal students who were helping individuals with their cases. Through the binational deportee program, I was the first step to the litigations program. We filed the papers, and then legal students get to further on the search for any application to the qualifying programs for the deportees and the refugee migrants. The normal day-to-day for me consisted of scheduling calls and conducting the calls, and basically just getting the information of the clients that I was working with. I specifically filed FOIA documents, which is the Freedom of Information Act. After we file these papers, that's when we get word back to see if the migrants qualify for any aid. And the slower work consisted of me just continuously updating the spreadsheets. And that was probably one of the biggest challenges, because a lot of times, since this program is so heavily volunteer-based, a lot of interns would step in and out. So I would say that it was pretty difficult to pick up the information that wasn't really reported at times. Nevertheless, though, it was still really fun to be able to like see all the clients and get to watch their progress through like the spreadsheet, which is very nerdy, but it was really cool to like develop relationships with them and be able to see their progress through this way of tracking it. So my role, I was originally supposed to work in the Border Rights Project because I'm really interested in legal work. However, because of my Spanish proficiency, they asked me to step into the binational deportee program since I would regularly talk one-on-one with the clients, and most of them spoke Spanish. The only thing about the binational deportee program was that this summer was the first year having an internship cohort. And there was only 2 interns at that time. So it was definitely something that was more of a learning process since both my supervisor had never had an intern before and the program itself had never really had like someone to help that would be stepping in and out regularly. So I will admit that a lot of times it felt kind of a little disorganized, for lack of a better word, but my supervisor was extremely supportive and I absolutely loved her. She made it really easy to like step in and out of the process and she made it really easy to like ask questions and she just made me feel very comfortable throughout the entire time. So although I do recognize that it was kind of a learning process throughout the summer, I'm really grateful that I still got to learn from her. And overall, I absolutely loved interning for Al Otro Lado. Like I said, I always felt comfortable to ask questions and ask if anything didn't make sense, I was able to ask my supervisor. And I would absolutely recommend this internship to anyone in this room. But I do think that it's an internship that requires a lot of like individual work and self-pacing. So if that really isn't something that you believe would be manageable, I would definitely not suggest this internship just because there's a lot of volunteers who are continuously stepping in and out. So you kind of have to like motivate yourself throughout the day to do your work and be able to like actually make productive progress. And as for the application, the work that I did consisted of helping people who had been deported a lot of the times on like criminal charges. So in the beginning, it was a little difficult to like handle this like moral ambiguity of helping people who I thought hadn't done the best of things. But as I developed relationships with my clients, it was absolutely transformative to like understand that a lot of times like these individuals are pushed to do very desperate things that they wouldn't really do in like regular circumstances. So it kind of helped me widen my scope of the human rights within that realm that like people like it just gave me a second layer of understanding that sometimes people do have to make hard choices just to survive. But yeah, I'm really grateful to like come to understand those and come to develop the relationships I did with them. So yeah, and I also love being able to improve my Spanish proficiency.
All right, moving on. Thank you, Carolina. I was remiss not to say we're going to take Q&A at the end of the panel, so please write down questions and notes. And if you're online, please add them into the chat and we'll get to those after everyone has presented. We're moving on to Hanna Ho, who did an internship with Public Health Sciences Department. So please welcome Hanna.
And hi, my name is Hanna Ho, and I'm a 4th year here in the college, majoring in public policy and human rights. I have an interest in social determinants of health. So this summer I interned at the UChicago Public Health Department, and I was supported by Pozen along with the Biological Science Collegiate Division, where I was a summer fellow there. And I was supported by Dr. Dejing Huo and Dr. Kavi Bala, and my mentors were Huang Zhao and Jason Freeman. So I just want to shout out them for all their support and internship. I actually took this internship as I didn't have many research skills, so I did want to come in with something that I didn't have before, and turns out I actually love research, so I had a really great positive experience. So I just want to share some things that I did this summer. So I worked on 2 projects. The first project was looking into research and like independent work. I was looking at hypofractionated radiation for breast cancer treatment and seeing disparities between the treatment, looking at the financial impacts, how demographics can impact how some patients are able to receive it and have more accessibility. And this also really helped my preparation for learning how to write a thesis. I feel really confident stepping into this year, writing my thesis for my public policy and human rights majors. Just because, as you can see on the little left side, I learned how to organize data correct, like that is useful for me. I've learned what my strategies are for researching and writing, looking out for online. And then as for my second project, it was a collaboration. So it was really cool that I got to experience both sides of like what can come with research. I was working with a group of like around 10 people, collaborating and learning how like the process gets put out, while like the beginning stages was the independent work that I was doing, but the second part was really like meeting with people and getting the surveys out to people, which was cool. That my freshman year, I was a research assistant working at the hospitals project doing the interviews to patients. And this summer, I actually got to like make those research surveys. So it was just really cool to have a 360 experience. And I've really enjoyed it a lot. So, and so, yeah, part of what I did, I got to be with others that are working on different health issues in the public health department. So while I was working with Dr. Dejing Kuo, I got to work with other summer fellows in the department working with other professors. And it was just such a rewarding experience because I got to like talk to peers, and like where I was brand new to the field, it was really cool that they also were new to research. So we it was a learning process for us all. Came out with like new friends here at the school, and we would meet every Friday during the summer, and we'd have luncheons with their professors, and we would talk about different health issues every week. So it was cool to hear from one professor. He's actually working on a thesis topic that I'm doing this related to what I'm doing for my thesis this summer, contamination in water. So it was just cool to hear about things that I hadn't heard of before, and looking at different health issues, because being interested in social determinants of health, there's so many aspects to health, and I really want to dive deep and explore what that can look like. And that's what this has provided me. And so the best part of this experience was that I got to come out with something of my own, and I got to see the whole process come out through my independent and collaboration projects. And so I created this research poster and through the fellowship, and got to present it at the end of the fellowship. And just to give a little background, brief, I know time's short, but I looked at fear of cancer reoccurrence in patients with breast cancer. For the background, I was looking at pointing out that breast cancer is increasingly diagnosed every year, but we can consider things that like impact patients, which is fear of cancer reoccurrence. And this can affect patients through their emotional distress, healthcare utilization. So many things to consider when thinking of fear of cancer reoccurrence. And the goal here was just to see like how that's impacted. And I was looking at age, ethnicity, and race, tumor stage, and time since diagnosis. And it was cool coming in that since it's a science-based field, that I was able to bring in the human rights language. So I was very intentional with my title, and I didn't want to say breast cancer patients. I wanted to make sure that there was agency. So I had conversations with my mentors, and really like focusing on language is really important to me. So just to point out that, because it was like kind of cool to like bring in the human rights field of study. And so, yeah, for the methods was part of the collaboration work that I did with them. We sent out the surveys. So that's how I got my data. And then on my own time, I created these plots and was able to see like how fear of cancer reoccurrence is presented. And it turned out that patients who are white and Hispanic, who are under 50 years old and have been more diagnosed with like later advanced tumor stages, they've been have a higher fear of cancer reoccurrence. And I was able to also make future directions of like how and like kind of speaking up for like community engagement. I think that we could have more of that. So it was just cool to talk to my mentor afterwards, getting all these results and setting up so that for future studies that he does, that we can he can maybe implement them later. So, but yeah, that's the recap. I'd like to thank the Pozen Center, Cliff, and Maha for like just supporting me throughout this whole thing, and all the workshops, Gifford, Professor Gifford, the trauma and the workshop really helped me like throughout this. So I appreciate that. And thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much, Hannah. I've got questions already. All right, we're moving on now to Michael Wilmette. Am I saying that properly? Guilmette, excuse me, who's going to talk to us about Act Now after school programs. Welcome.
All right, thank you. I'm Michael. I am a fourth year anthropology major here, jointly enrolled in the master's program and as an undergrad in the college. And I'm also pursuing a certificate in education and society. Generally, my work is interested in like education and policy, as well as some involvement with various on-campus organizations around like youth development and education. And so I really wanted to use this internship as an opportunity to sort of apply my interests and connect my interest in education and policy, as well as learning more about like what a career in the nonprofit sector would look like. So I chose to work at Act Now, which stands for After School for Children and Teens Now, which is the Illinois statewide network of more than 2,700 members from across the state that addresses sort of all sorts of programs outside of the traditional school day, providing different services to youth, anything from curricular support to even providing like food and a safe place to go after school. So a wide variety of programs outside of the school day. And it's a small team of about 12 full-time staff members whose like organizational goals vary from policy and advocacy, quality, professional development, different supports to programs, and also looking to advocacy towards state legislators, which was more of my interest in my internship. So I was a part of the policy and communications team, where there were 2 full-time employees and 3 interns. And where my responsibilities included everything from managing social media, building like toolkits for programs to use, making one-pagers on policy, and creating graphics, also promoting after school to policymakers. So talking to like legislators about after school funding issues. And also working with the policy and advocacy committee, which includes shareholders from after school programs. So like a big part of the Act Now model is that it's a coalition. It very much involves the programs themselves in like what's important to them, how they conduct advocacy, as well as other aspects of the program. So it's very much looking towards those local programs and how to represent them on a state level. So my projects, my 3 biggest projects that I wanted to touch on were around the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which is a federally funded program for after school. And there was a misallocation of funds during COVID in Illinois that led to a problem with funding a new competition this year, which meant a loss of programming for about 6,000 youth this year. And so I was working on sending letters to legislators and trying to emphasize the importance of finding stopgap funding to prevent larger losses in the coming years, both in like institutional knowledge as these programs are lost and in the loss of programming for more youth. I also worked on some grant writing for a full service community schools grant. So community schools are sort of a school model that looks at taking a public school and connecting it with the community partners to create like a really community oriented structure and more like wraparound services as well. So I helped with certain aspects of writing that, including obtaining letters of support and writing the steering committee overviews. And then I also worked on district profiles, which are an advocacy tool used by the organization that sort of give an overview to legislators of what after school looks like in their districts. And so I created an automated dashboard using the data that Act Now collects on programs that creates a printable dashboard that you can then just create, and also programs can use to create to help as an advocacy tool with legislators directly. And so my takeaways from my internship, you can see off to the right, what like the dashboard roughly looked like, the first page of it. I really enjoyed working in that small team setting. I got to do so many different things as a result of being a smaller team. I was able to present at multiple convenings and conferences. I was able to work on resource guides that looked directly at how to support programs. And so many other things. I was able to help with data and tracking, which was also really interesting and not originally within the scope of my internship. And I would also encourage people to not be afraid to share their ideas and projects. I made like a map of the after school maps, which was sort of a mini project that I was doing as I was looking at different states, like mapping ideas and how like we can best present our information. And then I made a little mini map out of it just because I had all this random data, and it became something that was really interesting to different states as well. And I'm still sort of answering inquiries about that. And yeah, I really enjoyed hybrid work was another aspect. So I really like the flexibility of that, and definitely would recommend that you think about that sort of aspect of the internship, and will personally be looking at that going forward. And it really helped to grow my vision of education and youth development and what that entails. I have a much broader idea of education. Working in after school, I was not originally looking at after school. I was looking at more traditional educational nonprofits. But I really encourage you to, expand the scope of what you're looking at, because it was really impactful for my own like personal development to work in after school and get a more holistic vision of what schooling and education is as a whole. Looking forward, I'm really excited about nonprofit work. I'm actually continuing back now as a policy and advocacy fellow. I'm helping to facilitate more of that 21st century community learning center side of things. So much more focused than my internship, but working on creating a youth advocacy cohort around 21st century. Got the opportunity to go down to Springfield this fall to advocate to state legislators. So I'm continuing my work in that area, and I'm really grateful for this experience. You can see some photos from some of the convenings and conferences we went to. I'm just very happy for the opportunity to work with ACT now with such great supervisors and staff. And thank you to the Pozen Center for supporting it financially, and also with all the workshops and meeting support. It's very helpful. So thank you all.
Thank you, Michael. All right, we're moving on to Christina, or I know her as Stina. Are you Christina today? Her formal name, who will be telling us about her UN Population Fund internship. Welcome.
Okay, so this is just an overview of my presentation. I'll just be talking about myself, the main project that I worked on over the summer, and takeaways from my experience. I don't know why they're all ones, but anyways, so about me, I'm a fourth year in the college, and I'm double majoring in East Asian languages and civilizations, focusing in Korean and human rights. And my hobbies include singing, music, cooking, fashion, reading, and starting crossword puzzles. Finishing them is it's a different story. But over the summer, I interned for the UNFPA, which is the United Nations Population Fund. It's the UN agency dedicated to global reproductive health and gender and social norms. So UNFPA is a fairly large UN agency. We have offices in over 150 countries. So getting that experience to work at an international organization was something that I was looking for when I was doing my internship search. And UNFPA has three main transformative results, or goals, as they like to call it. So one is to end preventable maternal deaths, two, to end the unmet need for family planning, and three, to end gender-based violence and harmful practices. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the main project that I worked on over the summer, but before I talk about it, I'm going to do my best to try to condense it. I do want to say that this is a project that me and the two other co-interns started, and it wasn't necessarily finished or was ever planned to be finished during our internship. Rather, it was handed off to a full-time employee. So it's still ongoing and continuing, but we kind of set the foundation for it all. So I'll first talk about the sources that we analyzed and the objectives of our qualitative data analysis project. So there were, there's a little bit of overlap in the text. Sorry about that, but I can still talk about it. So one of the things we we're analyzing were called focus group discussions, which were basically just meeting notes on different offices that met to discuss challenges and potential solutions they were facing with the situation of the 3 transformative results. So that was just like one large document of text for each of the meetings. And then the other sources we used were what they called output 3 and output 4 challenges. So output 3 and 4 were 2 parts of their strategic plan for the years of 2022 to 2025. Output 3 focused on all things related to gender and social norms, and output 4 was about population change and data. So mostly like macro trends like climate change and how that affected population. So our objective was to find a way to analyze these narratives from the meeting notes of the FGDs and SP outputs 3 and 4 to understand the challenges and possible solutions of the country offices and help them support their analysis for midterm review, since we're reaching like the halfway point of 2022 to 2025. So going into this, there were several limitations and challenges that shaped the way we approached the project. So one was varying lengths of narratives. Some of the countries that submitted like challenges they were facing with output 3, for example, were a couple bullet points long. So those were like fairly easy to just read manually, but some of them were like paragraphs and paragraphs or pages and pages of just like chunks of text. So obviously, it was a lot of data to manually read through. To have one person read through everything would be fairly inefficient and take a long time. So we were wondering if there was a way to just have some AI software parse through it initially to see if there were key themes or issues to focus on and then go from there. Other limitations were costs of AI software. So we did try to like veer towards ones that were easy to use and free. And there's also a prerequisite of substantive knowledge. The first 2 weeks of my internship were dedicated to just figuring out what data was available at the UN. But honestly, I feel like that alone could have taken 2 months. Because there's so much stuff out there, was what I came to learn. So there were 3 steps of the process. One was to generate codes. So codes is basically just themes, but like sub themes. Step 2 was to classify these small themes into larger themes. And then step 3 was to assign matching scores, which I'll explain later. So step 1, generating codes or like small themes. We just call it codes to avoid confusion. What we would do is we used an AI powered platform called Olivas, and we would just feed it the narratives and then ask for it to give us recurring themes that it found. And then we would take those set of themes, put it into just like convert it into a normal spreadsheet and categorize them into larger themes that were predefined and given to us by our supervisors, which that was the one manual step of it. I do think that it's pretty difficult at this point. Like, even though AI is really impressive, I don't think we're quite at the point where we can like fully rely on it to do something that a manual like a human would do when they like read through other people's writings, if that makes sense. So this is what it looked like. In the middle, we have the codes that were spat out and given to us by the software. And then on the left, the drop-down menu is where we would try manually categorizing it. We did try to automate that process at one point, but it just wasn't perfect. So we did this first. And then step 3 was assigning matching scores. So you might know what ChatGPT is, you might have heard of it. So we did try using that since that is a very accessible AI platform. So the purpose was to give Chat these narratives back and try to ask it to assign matching scores with what were like these larger themes. To do a better job of what that means, basically, not every country is facing like issues in all of these areas. Maybe they are, but some are like bigger issues than others. For example, country X might have a larger issue with funding and lack of funding, but we don't want to have to read through pages and pages to figure that out. Instead, we could just ask chat, and chat might give us an answer like, yeah, that's a 90% match. Like, this country has a really big issue with funding, but then like a 20% match with data collection. Like, they're pretty okay with that. So you don't need to focus on that. That's basically what it is. So here's a sample of the sorts of results that we got. So the bottom picture is pretty much like what we would get from ChatGPT. This is an example of Algeria. So it'd say the category of lack of stakeholders' commitment and support had an 80% match, or 0.8 out of 1 match, which meant that that was a big issue for that office. And then we also converted it to just like a score dictionary, so we could use that for further analysis. One of the hardest parts was refining the prompt and figuring out how to talk to a computer. So we tried a lot of different like language differences. For example, we included a more detailed description of what a matching score is. In red was what we had at first. We just asked it to assign a score with a maximum score of 1. But I think that it got confused with that. So we had to explain that matching scores were determined by association and not just by frequency. So a lot of explaining there. We also tried including more detailed ChatGPT generated definitions of the themes, but we also realized that sometimes asking it to do too much with too many words made it inconsistent and confusing. So we tried putting our results into what felt like digestible graphs. So here's a sample of some of our results for the focus group discussions. In a very simple way was what we were aiming for. So challenges, it came to the conclusion that there was a 60% match for most focus group discussions, that like capacity was a big issue. Funding was like a lower issue. This is kind of just an example of one of the drafts we came up with. But then there were also some discrepancies there too. So we had to like really smooth out everything, but we were writing down like everything in our purpose, in our process, and giving it to our supervisors. Here's another example. So offices also came up with potential solutions, and they said that direct intervention, like sending more employees, for example, was a top mention of potential solutions. Here are more results. So for output 3, this was some of the challenges in specifically the Arab states. So one of the biggest challenges was lack of stakeholders, commitment, and support. So stakeholders in this situation could have been us, the UNFPA, local governments, or other NGOs and nonprofits that we were working with. This is a good example of some of the inconsistencies we face, since here all the matching scores were consistently lower. Like the highest one we got here was 0.3. Whereas on this slide, it was 0.6. So this is why the project ended up being handed over and like continued on, but it was a great start. And I do think that this is effective, because having a human read through everything for a 3-year strategic plan is just unrealistic. Okay, other takeaways from the work. So it was a remote internship, and with a remote internship, I think it's a little bit more difficult to stay connected with your team. So something I started was Friday recipe sharing. We had like a Google Chats group chat, and we also use Notion to sort all of our work. So every Friday I would come up with a theme, and we were all from different places. And I would ask everyone to like send in a recipe from their culture or heritage or wherever they were from. So different themes included like beverages, fusion, etc. So I don't know, it was just a nice way to talk about something that wasn't work. Other takeaways, I did work a remote internship, but I got to visit in person in New York for a week, which was a really special experience. And during the week that I was visiting, the UN Population Award Ceremony were also happening, which is just like an award ceremony to celebrate like outstanding contributions to individuals or nonprofits that contributed to population issues. So I was just checking in people, but it was still really cool to be able to go there and like sit in the last 15 minutes and like wear the little translation earpiece, which I've never done before. So that was really awesome. And it was also really interesting to learn a whole new research method in a non-classroom context with what felt like hands-on and interesting data. Since before this, I hadn't done qualitative data analysis like this. And having access to all that data did feel overwhelming, but it was also nice to know that like all this collection was going on. I did feel like I was seeing work that was being done and what felt like so many minds and so many people's efforts coming together, if that makes sense. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Very exciting. All right, we're moving on to Tanaya Vahra for the Addis Clinic. Welcome.
Hi, guys. I'm Tanaya, and it's a little bit misleading because it says a summer with. I actually started working with the Addis Clinic back in March, and I'm continuing to work with them through December. So if anyone has any questions about how to continue on with your Pozen internship before, or we'll start it before, continue it after, I can speak to that as well. But a little bit about me. So I'm currently a third year. I'm a political science major and human rights, health and society double minor. I had and still have a very strong interest in learning about global health and public health. So that's what drew me to the Addis Clinic. And this was an entirely remote internship as well. So there's no pictures of me, unfortunately, but you'll see some pictures of our lovely team. So about the organization, it was founded in 2011. It's headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee, but there's actually only 2 full-time employees who work in the Nashville office. The majority of the team is based in Kenya and Somalia, which is where the work actually gets done, and a number of rural and remote communities there. What they do is they essentially provide medical care, psychosocial support, health education to the communities that need it the most, that are struggling the most with lack of access. And they do these through these 5 main programs. So the telemedicine, which is sort of the biggest innovation in the healthcare space, which is essentially they have what they call a volunteer medical corps, where they invite healthcare professionals and providers from all over the world to sign up and give their time for free, so pro bono, to advise and consult and guide the Addis Clinic members who are in Kenya and Somalia that might need help with a certain case. So I actually just put together a bit of marketing stuff, which I'll talk about it later, but I just put together a little piece about how we had a diabetes case last year come in that was misdiagnosed for about 3 or 4 months. The girl was struggling. There was no specialist in the area that the family could afford or that they could get to because they were in a very remote area. And through the telemedicine network, she was able to get the drugs that she needed. She got the treatment that she needed, and she's happy and doing well. So it's that kind of sort of digital and then in-person hybrid support. HIV messaging and support is pretty self-explanatory. There's obviously a really big stigma in a lot of these communities. So the Addis Clinic tries to address that and educate both men and women, adults and young children about the importance of seeking care, seeking help, not to stigmatize, receiving care and help and taking medicine for that. Girls' health and safety, also pretty explanatory. This has a lot to do with sex education and also overlaps a lot with the HIV messaging and support. Maternal, child, and health, also pretty explanatory. This actually ends up working with a lot of teen moms. That seems to be the very large demographic that the Addis Clinic works with as well. And then obviously the children that they give birth to. And then global health education. This is both in Kenya and Somalia, and the Addis Clinic also partners with a number of universities here in the States through global health programs, and basically allows students here to participate remotely and also in person with advising on cases through like the same technology as a telemedicine network there. So it gives them, an opportunity to practice their global health skills. And then also, for pre-med students, it's a great opportunity for them to practice working like that. So my role with the Addis Clinic for the past however many 7 months now has been in strategic marketing and brand development and communications. Basically, prior to me coming to the Addis Clinic, they didn't have anybody doing their communications work. So that's social media, that's doing their website. They had a website that hadn't been touched in like 7 years. So it was looking a little, like Pinterest from 2012. I also helped to relaunch their weekly newsletter, which is really important. If you know anything about nonprofits, you know that funding and money is sort of the name of the game. So the importance of social media, digital branding, communications in general is to really attract new board members, which gratefully or thankfully we were able to onboard 2 during my time there so far. It was to attract, of course, new partners, whether that's universities here or nonprofits that we could collaborate over with in Kenya and Somalia. And then, of course, donors. That's a big one. So other things here, this is sort of some of the output that I did. So up there, if anybody knows Squarespace is now the bane of my existence, but that was my best friend for a good chunk of my internship. So basically reorganizing your website, if you want to go check it out, that was on me. It was a lot of fun getting to see, something that I really had full control over. It was a project that they gave me a lot of creative control with. So I had the opportunity to really break it down and then build it from the ground up. And when I say build it from the ground up, one of the very first projects I did for them was literally make a branding guide. So that's identifying the individual colors they had in their logo, putting codes to them and being like, these are the colors that we need to keep consistent throughout our marketing, because they didn't have that, or even fonts or shapes, or, a basic layout for their social media. Prior to me, it was a lot of just captions and random photos taken, which were beautiful and which were great, but they needed a little bit of structure. So thanks to a lot of the campaigns I was able to run with my supervisor, Megan, I love her, she's great. We were able to grow their social media presence across all platforms by a minimum of 70%, which is really, really great. We had a lot more interaction. The quarterly reports were big in helping with that as well. So that's just me consolidating all of the data across the programs and some of the really big achievements that the team accomplished, putting it into a readable, digestible, aesthetically presentable form, putting it on the website, sharing it with the board members at board meetings. And of course, the newsletters are newsletters. Everybody knows what an email looks like. This was one of the projects that I was the most proud of. I call it the staff story campaign. It doesn't actually have a formal name, but essentially we realized that a lot of the social media content was statistics. It was, once in a while photos and videos of stuff that was being done, but our teams across all 5 programs in Kenya and Somalia had so many amazing stories from direct interactions with patients, from things that they had overheard, from things that they had seen. There was really no way to share them, because patient confidentiality is a big deal, but also because there was just no way for them to constantly send them in, like via text message, via email. It gets really messy. So I put together this Google form, really very simple thing, sent it out to all members of the team, and we started getting in all of these incredible stories of matching pictures with captions, with amazing one-liner quotes that were really, really touching, but also really, really important to show how much the donations that we were getting in were actually supporting the work that we were doing. And we turned those into nice, pretty Instagram posts, but also Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. We put them into our quarterly reports. We were sharing them at board meetings. We shared them at conferences that our team went to, and it was a really good way to really show on paper and to provide tangible proof of what the organization was doing. So some main takeaways. I think I was really, really lucky that I found an organization that was willing to take me early and then willing to have me continue on after. I'm actually working for them as a freelance marketing consultant now, so I'm getting paid directly by them, which is great if you're looking for something like that. But I also really, really learned that they want you to be a part of their organization. So they are looking to you to take the initiative, to speak up, share your ideas. They wanted you for your expertise. So it was really, really up to me, and it was my responsibility to say when I saw something that I think could be changed, and they're not going to take it badly if you point something out and you say, I think I can make this better, as long as you tell them how and as long as you're willing to do it. So that was a really big one. Having open communication with your team members, your supervisors, and that means all of them. Ask for their WhatsApp, maybe ask for their emails, send them constant things. They want you, they want your help. So that was a really big one as well. And I think as some of my cohort members have said as well, I was obviously working remote. So it was great to have all the independence and freedom that I had, but I had to keep myself accountable. It's one of those things, especially because I was working in a different time zone. It was hard sometimes to schedule Zoom calls, to schedule meetings, but at the end of the day, you have to make sure that you're really on top of the work that you're doing, because they're counting on you for that. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanaya. All right, and last up, Jordan Flaherty, working on Crime Lab. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking about my 2023 internship at the University of Chicago Crime Lab. So just to give a little bit of an overview of the presentation, I'm going to be introducing myself, talking about a background about crime in Chicago, projects I worked on, challenges, skills, and future plans. Okay, so I'm Jordan. I'm a third year here in college studying law, letters, and society, and I'm minoring in quantitative social analysis and Spanish. And I reached out to my former professor to talk about interning with him this summer at the Crime Lab. So I actually did a non-traditional internship there. They do a lot of different projects in Chicago, but I actually did research for the professor that leads the Crime Lab for his book project, which is about combining gun violence and behavioral science. So now I'm going to give a little bit of background about the scope of the problem that I was working on. So in Chicago, every day, there are approximately 1.6 homicides. And if we compare this to some of their major cities, we can see that this is much larger than in New York and in LA. And traditional responses to this problem, like policing, are not solving the problem. So you can see that Chicago has
2 times police per capita as LA, but 3 times as much gun violence. So clearly, we need to have new innovative solutions. And that's kind of where the crime lab comes in. So nearly 80% of gun violence takes place in 15 neighborhoods in Chicago. And so the crime lab kind of takes a data-driven approach where they do different projects and they try to use data to prove what are things that actually can respond to crime and reduce crime, and kind of reimagining systems that we have. So for example, putting people who do treatment into policing centers to divert people who are arrested for low-level drug charges into treatment instead of incarcerating them. And they also do interventions in schools, so they are really tightly wound with the education lab as well. So my role at the crime lab is I did a bunch of research projects for Professor Jens Ludwig's book, which is kind of summarizing the work that he's done at the crime lab for the past 10 years. So you can see I did a lot of different little projects, but I would go pretty deep. I would read a lot of literature and then kind of make a deliverable. So you can see the docs on the bottom, but I'd make like a several page presentation, send it to him, present it in our weekly meeting. And then he would say, hey, can you look into this data more? Or can you give this follow-up? So I'm going to talk about 2 cases I did. It's hard to emphasize which ones are the most important because I did so many cases that contributed to research for the book. But one thing I looked at that I thought was interesting on the qualitative side is this case, which is the NRA sued New York State for having restrictive gun licensing laws, saying that it violated the Second Amendment. And basically what Jens, my boss, wanted to know is why are leftists like the Bronx Defenders Organization siding with the NRA in this case? Why are they filing amicus briefs on the side of the NRA? I don't understand this. So what I did was I read the Supreme Court decision, I read the briefs that were filed, and I basically found that these leftist organizations were arguing that gun possession charges enable disproportionate incarceration in marginalized communities. So what's supposed to limit gun violence actually becomes a mechanism for police officers to unequally apply the Second Amendment. So the people who are getting arrested for this are disproportionately marginalized communities. And this kind of helped him inform his section on gun rights history in his book, and was research. So another research project I did was quantitative, and I looked at the prosecutorial outcomes of weapons cases in Chicago. So you can see in the graph, these are some different outcomes of unlawful use of weapons cases in Chicago. So I downloaded these and then coded them into a spreadsheet. And it's interesting because there's a rhetoric that since Kim Foxx, a more liberal prosecutor, was elected in Chicago, that the felony has gone way down. So she doesn't prosecute cases. But if you look at the data, you can actually see in that bottom graph that after, this is from the Marshall Project, by the way, to credit them. But you can see that after she took office, the cases that were charged only went down 5%. So this is kind of helping him back up claims about Chicago prosecutorial outcomes in his book. A cool experience I had in this internship is I got to go to New York with my boss and hear all of these sociologists and economists give feedback to his book right at the beginning of my internship. And this was a really awesome experience because before I even started doing research, I heard all these people give really large scale critiques and responses to his book. And so this really helped me inform my work this summer because I didn't just feel like, oh, I'm doing this little research project. I understood how it fit into his project of improving his book and making all the arguments as airtight as possible before it goes out to the general public. So some challenges of the job. Sometimes it was tough doing research because you don't know if the outcome is out there. For example, I was trying to find a quote from Arnie Duncan, who is the head of a nonprofit in Chicago, about his perspective on social change. And I looked everywhere. You can see I watched 5 of his speeches, which are like an hour long each, and read every single newspaper article that he cited and tried to find this quote that was really important for the book to explain how his social organization changed. And I, at one point, just had to say, I can't find this, which is tough sometimes as a Chicago student to recognize. Another thing that was interesting is that people only come to the office about 3 days a week now. So I had to kind of adapt to the changing work culture, like being able to work from home and obviously balance the demands of going to the point. And it's really nice out, but you just have to sit inside and finish your research brief on time. So that was a challenge that I kind of learned to deal with this summer, setting deadlines for myself. Skills I gained. I learned how to do Excel data manipulation. So on the left, this is a chart of the different types of restricted gun laws since 1990. So this was a really interesting project where I downloaded this huge database and then made a graph where you can see that most of the gun laws that have been passed since 1990 are background checks and prohibited possessor checks. The other graph is about overcrowding as a percent of households to look at poverty rates over time. So this was a skill that I really developed in this internship. I also just learned a lot about gun violence research, like where do you look to find important statistics about gun violence, who is on the political scene in Chicago and what are their beliefs, and who's Kim Foxx, who's Brandon Johnson, what are the different political views of big players in Chicago. And I really enjoyed working in crime lab as well because there was a really nice employee culture. You can see they had an ice cream party for us. They did office mini golf one day, which was very distracting. I was trying to do an Excel spreadsheets. But anyway, that was a really great experience, even though the work can be very intense and you're looking at very upsetting data and stories. This was a really nice way to decompress, and I really enjoyed working with my team. So what did I learn from the future from this internship? I gained a bigger focus on quantitative skills, and as a result, I'm now minoring in quantitative social analysis because I've kind of learned how big that is in public policy now and how important it is to be able to understand, the kind of language of statistics, to be able to truly communicate about these issues. I also would love to work on more book projects. I thought it was really cool that all the research that I was doing isn't just like a briefing on email. Like one day this will be printed on paper in a book, which is really cool. Like some of the graphs I made in his slideshow could even be in his book eventually, which is coming out in spring 2025. But so that was really cool. I enjoyed that. And then I was also kind of grabbed by the importance of responding to gun violence. I think that it can sometimes come up only occasionally in the US when we're responding to a mass shooting, but really spending like every day looking at statistics about gun violence in Chicago just taught me so much about how this is an ongoing problem that it's really important to focus on. And I'm also taking a class called Crime in Latin America now that was definitely influenced by this internship. In the long term, I'm interested in law, but this internship also made me consider pursuing a public policy MA, thinking about returning to the crime lab. And then also a big thing I took away is the power of specialization. I think often as an undergrad, you can kind of be billed like, go into policy, go into law. And a lot of people I'm working with, it doesn't really matter to them which field they're in. Like Jens is an economist, but he also works in public policy. He's also writing a book. And he's just spent his whole career focusing on how can I reduce crime in Chicago and mitigate gun violence. And even just sitting in with all these researchers, I think that it can be much more gratifying to devote yourself to an issue area instead of thinking about it as like a field you're going into. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone for listening to my presentation. Thanks to my team at the Crime Lab. Kelly's on the call for my past summer internship. And I just want to say thank you so much to Hanna and Cliff and everyone at the Pozen Center. You all are so supportive, and even all the other interns, and it was such a supportive and welcoming space to really learn about careers. So thank you, everyone.
I'm going to invite the interns up to a panel for a brief Q&A. All right, thank you. I have so many questions, but I'm going to limit myself for time. So I'm going to ask a question that has to do with my area of research. Thank you, Hannah, for mentioning the trauma-informed practices workshop that we do to help prepare to do a human rights internship. Human rights work can often be very grueling, very disturbing. We're usually working on violations rather than wins, although it's good sometimes for perspective to look at some of the wins that we've made over time. So I'm wondering if any of you learned any personal or more structural strategies about how to deal with trauma and how to keep the work moving forward, or for your team members or supervisors as well, if you learned any helpful hints.
I can answer this one a little bit. So one of the projects that I did was I was looking for an anecdote of a shooting for the book. So this involved like reading a bunch of news articles about shootings, which is obviously not something that you would normally expose yourself to in your daily life. And I definitely did find it coming up like walking around Hyde Park at night, thinking about danger and violence more. So something that I learned from my supervisor was that she said, this is obviously very simple, but like take walks when you're working, like take breaks and like pay attention to how you're feeling. Like don't just cruise through the work. And that's something I started to do. Like if I was doing that work, I could just say, you know what, this is getting kind of intense. I'm just gonna
take a break, eat a snack, come back to it later. So that's like a relatively simple strategy, but I think that can really help. And then also just, I don't know, kind of not being aware of ways that it leaks into your daily life and not letting it do that too much.
Similarly, my work dealt a lot with speaking to people about their deportation cases, and a lot of times it was a very like traumatic thing to make these clients recall. One of the biggest things my supervisor emphasized was trying to kind of lead people to find things that they were happy with in the circumstances. A lot of these people were deported to Tijuana, which is not a very safe place, but she asked us to just try to casually slip in questions like, but do you enjoy the parks like near you? Or is there anything, just to kind of switch the conversation from this happened to me to this is the life I live now, and kind of just help the clients as well as myself realize that while things happen, there's a lot of good things that can also come out of it. And there's a lot of goodness that can come from accepting the circumstances that life has given you. So yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, any questions from the audience? I've got more, but I want to give an opportunity. All right, I'm gonna go then. So I noticed many of you were working on representation of a human rights issue and filtering it down into something palatable, whether it was long form or very short form soundbite visual bites. And so I'd like for you to share with us, how do you put that information through a human rights lens? How do we make sure that we're representing it with human dignity, right? Rather than objectifying people or treating them only as subjects, I think you were referring to, Hanna. So is it simply that we add a human rights filter onto our work? Is it mainstreamed through everything we do? And how do you approach that?
I can try and speak to this one a little bit. So, I mean, obviously, as you guys saw, my entire position was essentially social media, digital communications, branding, and that can take on a very sort of shallow perception if you think about it on the base level. You're essentially making a brand look palatable, pretty colors, and so forth. I think one of the really key things that I have to keep in mind when doing the work, when telling these stories, when making this stuff attractive to a digital audience and to donors and board members and whatever, is that, to Professor Gifford's point, you're talking about real people, you're talking about real struggles, you're talking about real trauma and real stories. So even if maybe on a specific platform, you're keeping the names anonymous and you're using an infographic or Canva graphics to represent a story, to make sure that that story gets told in its full, raw, true form and completely uncensored somewhere else. So whether that was on the website, whether that was through a live web stream talk that we had, to make sure that these people and their struggles don't become, as you say, sort of tokenized, just for the sake of having a pretty aesthetic on an Instagram feed. So yeah, just really giving them their agency back as much as you possibly can without obviously violating their confidentiality. But yeah.
I feel like I can kind of speak on this too. At my internship, I wasn't the only intern. I had two co-interns that were also from Chicago, but they had fairly different backgrounds from me education-wise. One of them was a data science major and the other one was a computational biology major. So they definitely were more experienced in the coding side of things, which was helpful, but also there were times where I felt like the human aspect of it was severely missing, which was also really easy to happen at the UN because it just felt a little bit removed and the data just felt like something on a screen at times. And I think that coming from a more STEM background, it was easy for them to forget that too. And so it was a very uncomfortable and weird trap at times. But I think that my supervisor did a really good job of trying to incorporate the human rights aspect of it. Like every week he would send us sound bites or snippets of interviews that spokespeople of UNFPA had done. So yeah, it's a little bit difficult. I think I was lucky to have such a good supervisor, but otherwise it did kind of make me think, is it just on us to try to recenter ourselves and remember that the data we're dealing with is actual people. So yeah.
Thank you. Can I ask one more, Cliff? All right, one more, maybe for Michael and Hannah. Several of you talked about jumping in and sharing your ideas, and being a young staff member or an intern, that can be very intimidating. But some of you shared that you learned that we want to hear from each other, we want to work collaboratively. That is kind of within a human rights framework. So can you tell us more about how you found a way to take that space as a young and a new member of the unit?
Yeah, I can sort of speak to that. I mean, one thing I really appreciated about my internship was the small team aspect, and I felt like that was very helpful in that respect. My supervisor encouraged me, like in my first week, email everyone on the team, set up a time to meet and talk to them about like, what are your interests? What are their interests? Like, what do you do? And really understanding the team. And that was a great starting point for me to start those conversations about, okay, like this is what I'm interested in, this is what you're doing, like how can I support you, even if you're not explicitly like the person running my internship. And so I found it really helpful that was sort of integrated into the intern experience, but I think it's also a valuable lesson going forward in future workplaces, and also if anyone out there is also going to do an internship, like trying to connect with team members and not being afraid to reach out and try and do that really early to sort of connect your work and interests with their work. And that was super helpful with me kind of branching out into like, figuring out that I want to do the district profile tool because this is something that people are really annoyed by. And it's like tedious. And so building that, and so those conversations can be super helpful.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, I also can relate to Michael about small groups. I found that to be like a really great way to connect with people, and I learned through that to like really make initiative to like ask questions, like ask lots of questions, because I think that in this work too, we should also always question our own methods of the way we think. And for me, my research experience, I was new to research, so I think it was really cool to hear from like experts and ask questions and be like confident that I didn't know what I was talking about, and that's okay because it's a learning process. And also just taking initiative in these spaces. Like I got a second project by just asking like what I can do. So I definitely recommend just, you're gonna be in a lot of situations where people are just all gonna sit back. So make initiative and stand out. So
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. And I think we learned a lot from each of you. At the end of the day, a lot of human rights work is messing up with the power structures, right? So that we can all enjoy greater human rights. So thank you for giving us a window into your work. And one more round of applause.